Today, it's the MOPAR switches on 4 low rocks. Hey everybody, welcome back to 4 Low Rocks, and thanks for watching. Today we're going to show you how to install this 4-way switch kit for the JLUR Wrangler. This is going to allow us to add some electrically powered accessories to the Jeep. This switch kit normally comes as an option on the build for the JLUR Wrangler. We bought ours right off of the dealer's showroom, and therefore we didn't get this kit installed with the trailering package. This is available as an aftermarket accessory through MOPAR and several other places. If you shop around, you can find a pretty good deal on it. It normally retails for about $375. You can find it for much less. So let's get started. So to get started, first and foremost, all of the tools that you need for this install are well detailed in this instruction set that comes with the kit from MOPAR. Installation begins by removing these 4 rivets from the passenger side fender well. You might be asking why you need to do this. Well, you need to peel back that inner liner so that you can get to the electrical bulkhead, which is right behind the tire. So to start, we're going to use a trim removal tool to get behind the rivets. And gently pry them out a little bit. And all you want to do is make some room so you can get a cutter in between there and cut them away. So after the 4 rivets have been removed, there are 2 push pins down here at the bottom of the fender inner liner that you need to pull out with the trim tool. They come out relatively easy. Set those aside because you'll be putting them in back. After you have those 2 push pins removed, then it's just a matter of pulling the inner fender liner out up to the top rivet and just tucking it back behind the tire so that you can get access to the electrical firewall that's back in there. So with the inner fender liner peeled back like it is, tucked behind the tire, you can see that there's good access to the electrical bulkhead right behind the tire, which will be passing some wires through from the engine compartment into the interior of the cabin later on. So the next step is to remove these 2 ground isolators to make sure that the battery is kind of disconnected, or both batteries really are disconnected from the frame and from the ground, and then later on we'll remove the battery connector also, just to make sure we don't short anything out as we're going through this installation. So whenever I remove a connector like this, I like to take them away from the bulkhead, and I like to wrap them with an insulator to make sure that they're not going to touch and short out during the installation. I will also temporarily put the nuts back in place just to make sure I don't lose them down there in the engine compartment, because we all know once we go down there, we're probably not getting them back. And then we're back to a 10mm so that we can take the battery connection off. And once again, let's insulate that so that it doesn't connect again. Now you can see here where we've done a very rough job of just laying out the electrical routing harness across the engine bay. From the driver's side over to the passenger side, you can see the colored wires there coming out and the ground wires kind of sticking up in the air there. You can see the new parts because they're nice and clean and they're not all full of dust and covered in grime like the rest of the interior of the engine compartment. Now we're going to remove these 10mm nuts from the top of the coolant reservoir and this one here so that we can make some room for the wiring harness and also so we can attach the electrical box that comes with the system. You need to make sure that you get your wiring harness underneath these 2 mounts for the coolant reservoir right there, because later you're going to be bolting that back up. Next you're going to install the electrical connection mount over these 2 studs right here. The system comes with an additional 10mm nut to put on the stud that did not have a nut. And you'll reuse the stock stud on the other side. And once again, our trusty Jeep 10mm. And the electrical box just slides down over the new bracket that you just installed and clicks right in place, just like that. And you can route the cable because you're going to start tying it into place. Earlier during the installation, we removed these two ground isolators, stuffed them down into the cavity. This wiring harness is going to ground to this forwardmost grounding connector. So we need to remove it, and it's covered in paint, so it's probably going to take a little bit. We'll route the connector down and underneath it and replace the nut. So to remove this lower kick panel, remove this small panel first here. Get it to pop out. Set it aside. And to remove the door connector, you push the red tab up, and then below the white lever here, there's a little black button you have to push down. You pull the white lever up, all the way up, and then the bottom will disconnect. You can pull the door limiting strap off. So once we have this door switch connector removed from the panel by popping out the nut on the back, we're going to take a 10mm socket, remove this little bolt up here. Shouldn't take a whole lot. Should come right off there. And then this whole panel should start to remove from the bottom. This little rubber gasket pops out of there. We'll pop it loose in several places. And we'll take this right out of the Jeep. Now that we've removed that panel, the next step is this big connector here, which should just pop loose. There it is. Now we have the big gray connector loose. In order to get it open, you push on this little gray plug and at the same time pull the big gray handle back all the way to the top. And the male end should finagle right out of the female end. So now you can see that I have pulled my coat hanger through the bulkhead. I've thoroughly taped the end of the wiring loom to the coat hanger to make sure that it'll pass through the grommet, and wherever there was wires terminating along the length of the wiring loom, I also terminated those and taped those down to the rest of the wires, as you can see here, so that hopefully it'll slide right through that grommet. By the way, the instructions say that you should put a little dab of grease where your wire is going to make its first penetration through the bulkhead. So I've got a little bit of axle grease here, and I'm going to rub it right around the edge there, and hopefully that'll lubricate this wiring loom as it makes its way through. By the way. Okay, so now that we've got it all wired up and we're ready to pull it through the bulkhead, we've got our coat hanger here with the wires on the external side of the bulkhead. They're all tied to it, and we're going to start pulling it through. And we've successfully passed it all the way into the body of the car. And there are the 4 terminal ends for connecting internal accessories. So now that we've got all the wires run to the inside of the cabin, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work with the female side of this major large connector down here. And we're going to begin by removing what's called the TPA, this red cover, red or orange cover here from the outside. As you can see, we've removed the orange connector from the 5th place of this large connector socket. And this is going to connect to a new piece that comes with the kit. But before that, we need to insert the squared off orange connector. It's kind of round like that. See, there's a pointy one and there's a squared off one. And that's going to go into the original piece where the orange came out of on the back side here. Now you can see we've taken the orange cable that came out of the original gray connector here and connected it to the one side of the connector that came with the kit. And then we've taken the new wire that came with the kit along with the other side of the connector, both of them orange, put them on the same side of the connector, and we're going to snap those two together. Make sure we have a connection there. Next, we need to remove this center stack, and we're going to start by using a trim removal tool to take the center away. Once you have the center stack started, pulled away, you can then disconnect all the connections on the back. Once you have the dash panel pulled free and all the wires disconnected, one for the center and one for the start-stop, you can set that aside. Then we're going to remove this screw. It's right in the center of the stack, and that kind of holds everything in place. Okay, the center stack should just pop off with a couple clips, like that. And then you need to disconnect all of the connections on the back. So all this work that we've done so far has brought us to the point where we're ready to install the switches in the lower stack unit here that we've extracted from the interior of the Jeep. What we're going to do is replace this cubby that's on the right side from the driver's perspective on the unit here. And it'll look very nice. It'll sit very well with the lockers and sway bar disconnect switch. It'll look just like it belongs there. This is from the Rubicon model. If you have a Sahara or a Sport, you have a full width cubby, and you replace that whole cubby with the switches, and then it'll give you a partial cubby like we have just here. So we'll get to that right away. One thing that I need to tell you is that on the back, to remove this unit right here, these little nuts are 5.5 millimeter. Very interesting size, as most nut driver kits that are out there on the market today come with a 6 millimeter at the smallest point, and you'll have to find this as a special purchase. That's the only special tool that I had to buy for this whole installation. So let's go ahead and get this cubby out and get the switch kit, which I have right here, installed in its place. And it'll go right like that. And there are 4 of those little 5.5 millimeter bolts that I told you about on the back of the cubby, and we'll begin removing those. Having extracted all the bolts, the cubby pops out just like that. Now the switch housing unit just pops right into place where the cubby popped out, lines up perfectly, and we'll return those 4 small bolts to their original locations. And that part is complete. You see how the chrome matches. If you have a Sahara or a Sport, make sure that you order the right kit that does not have the chrome trim, because your lower cubby is in black, I believe. So there's the 4 auxiliary switches. So in order to get the cable up into the center stack, you have to pass it up through the wheel well, behind the glove box, up through the glove box compartment, and there's a short little passage where you'll have to use something like a fish stick or a piece of coat hanger again to pull the cable into the center stack area. From here we'll attach the connector onto the 7 cable ends and then reassemble the center stack. And once you've got the wire fed through through the glove compartment and into the center stack area, then you're going to attach this connector onto the end of the wire, and there are 7 different colored cables that come out of the connector here, and they're going to push into individual slots in this 10 slot cable connector. The instructions are very clear about which color wire goes into which, You will hear an audible click as you push each one in until they get to the end, and I'm not sure if you can see it very well, but you should be able to see the reflection of the metal connectors after they have arrived at their final location position. Once that's complete, you'll go ahead and snap this white cover back inside the connector. So now that we've completed the connector and the front panel, we're going to go ahead and install all of the connectors where they belong and replace this panel back into the center stack. So we'll start with the connector we just made, which goes on to the new switches. And then we'll find all the remaining connectors and get those connected up. So we got all of the cables connected to the back of the center stack panel. We've snapped it back into place. And now all that's left is to put the center stack screw back into the center to hold it in place. Snug it down. Now we'll go ahead and return the upper control unit to the center stack by plugging in two connections that we've pulled out at the very beginning. This one's important to make sure we can start the Jeep. Oh, and we've accidentally turned on the flashers, so let's turn those off. And this should plug right back in where it came from. Snugging it back in place. So we've tucked away all the wiring back up under the kick panel here. Zip tied some things together so that they won't fall down underneath the glove box, and made everything ready for reinstall of the trim pieces. So to start that, we'll go ahead and bring in the trim panel and get it started going back into place. You'll slide the trim panel underneath the door connector here. Kind of work its way back in there into the front of the Jeep, and it'll start to snap into place in a couple locations. And if you remember early on in the installation, when we took this panel out, there's a little 10mm bolt that secures it to the bulkhead, along with this kind of weird looking plastic washer, and it just fits right over the top of that little bolt. And we'll put the nut on top of the bolt. Just snug it up, doesn't have to be super tight. Next, we'll bring in the limiting strap from the door, push it over the top of the retainer there, and then we'll connect the door switch back into this connector, pull the white handle down to secure it, pull the red notch down also, and then secure it back on the bulkhead where it came from. It'll just slide into place there, and then put the cover back over everything. And that just snaps in a couple locations, and it's pretty secure. So now that we've completed all of the connections inside the Jeep and all through here in the engine bay, we're going to go ahead and reconnect all of the grounding connections. The first one we'll start with is the one that came within the kit. So that's the one that's right here on this farthermost post, and we'll go ahead and begin to tighten it down with a 10mm. Remember, it was covered with paint at the beginning, so it's still a bit tight. And then we've got the two grounds that we took off of the harness over here, and these are a 10 and a 13mm nut. And there's those three grounds. And then we'll go ahead and reconnect the main ground to the battery. And we'll use a 10mm deep well socket on this. And just snug it up. So now that we've got everything connected up and all the power restored to the Jeep, we're going to go ahead and use the Taser JL to enable the auxiliary lighting package. And we'll do that by pressing the start button to the run position without putting our foot on the brake to make sure we don't start the engine. And then we're going to hold the button to the left and hit cancel. And there we're into the JL. There's the light show. There's clear check engine lights, unmarry, performance, TPMS, radio, lighting, off-road. Okay, once we're in other, we'll click yes, and we're going to click aux to yes. Okay, and now the auxiliary lighting should be activated within the Uconnect system. And we'll go ahead and exit out of the JL, and we'll turn the power off to the system. So now that we've enabled the aux switches using the Taser JL, if we go into the menu on the Uconnect and we check out settings and scroll down, you'll see aux switches right here. And here's a method for allowing you to configure how each of these switches will work. Here's the way they come from the factory. It's set up for latching or momentary, power source to the battery or the ignition, whether or not it is controlled by running the ignition or not. Aux 2, pretty much the same way. Aux 3 and 4 are configured a little bit differently, so they're set to the ignition and to recall the last state. I think that means that if it was powered on when you shut the ignition off, it'll come back on as soon as you turn it back on. And aux 4 is configured the same way also. So that's how they look on the Uconnect system. Now the last step in completing this installation is to go back in and button up the inner fender well. So once we have everything configured using the Taser JL in the Uconnect system, we'll go ahead and turn the Jeep on, but we won't start the engine. Let it start everything up, and then we'll verify that we are getting lights on the switches. So there's aux 1, aux 2, aux 3, and aux 4. Now have them all set up for latching so that they press once and they latch on in an on state, and then press them to turn them off. You can also set them up to be temporary, where you push it and whatever you have connecting will come on and then go off as soon as you let go of pressure. Maybe a horn, a temporary spotlight, or something that you might connect to the Jeep. So that completes the installation of the MOPAR 4-way auxiliary switch kit. I think it looks very nice. You know, it looks like it rolled off the showroom floor with it. As a matter of fact, many of them roll out of the factory with that kit installed exactly as you see it there. I'd rate this on a scale of 1 to 5, a difficulty of approaching 3. It's not that it was super difficult. If you're not used to doing it, there are some unique things that you have to do, like passing that cable through the bulkhead, through a grommet that's in there. You've got to contort and twist your body into some weird shapes to try to get down underneath that glove box and back into the electronics compartment. And there's some very tiny little connectors that you have to work with to connect all of the 7 wires to the back of this switch housing, and the one down into the major connector into the passenger foot kickboard down there. But overall, I'd say it's worth it because it does look so stock. It'll add value to the vehicle, and it'll allow you to connect some things without having to drill into your panels, drill into the interior, hang something from the overhead, or maybe use a different kind of a pod that's controlled with your phone, as many of them are coming on the market these days. I hope you liked this video. I hope you enjoyed what you've seen here, and I hope this has shed new light on the installation of this system. I know there's some other videos out there that you may have seen. I'd like to just share my experience as one man's view of how this went for him. So good luck with your install, and we hope to see you on the trail soon. And until then, happy wheeling. And here's a quick preview of the first thing we're going to do with these new switches.